Hello to everybody. I am delighted to be able to greet you tonight. I think I know most everybody now that I've met the one person that I didn't know. So, as I don't have many months left as president of the League of Janesville, so it's still fun to be up here and have a chance to greet you all in this way. But I want to especially thank you for coming out for something that, learning about something that only comes up once a decade. You know, it feels like, how can you get excited when it only happens this much? And so I appreciate that you're willing to learn more about it, and we're trying to be proactive in the sense of learning before it has to actually happen and be done. So that's our strategy tonight. I want to just remind you of a couple other things that the League is real involved in. April 5th, what's happening? Elections. Okay, so we've got school board and city council races in both our communities. We're really, let me back up just a minute and say I'm really pleased that we're able to jointly sponsor this tonight with the Ballot League of Women Voters, and Betty Carr is here as president, and she has several of her members with her as well. So in addition to the local races, then there is the Supreme Court race, and you can find information about those candidates on the League's website. So that's another resource for you. Because they're both taking public money, we're not getting overwhelmed with information about them. And so that's good, but it means you might have to be a little more inventive in figuring out what you want to learn about. And we have also some information on the table over here about other upcoming programs. The Janesville League in April will be having a program looking at how fraud impacts Medicare. So that's something you may have an interest in. And the Ballot League has some of their information over there as well. So please take time to look at that. And there are packets of the information that we're going to be looking at tonight. And come on in. So I will pass those out as we're getting started so that you could take notes and whatever else you might want to do. And now it's my privilege to introduce Ethel Himmel, who will be moderating tonight. She has been the one to facilitate getting the planning done for this and making the arrangements, and just really appreciate her work on that. She's a past president of the Janesville League and is currently serving on the state board for the League of Women Voters. So we appreciate her willingness to be involved at that level as well. So Ethel?
Good evening and welcome to what I think is going to be a very informative program on drawing legislative district lines. Now, here we go. If only it were this simple. The process is simple, but it's also pretty complicated. We tend to think we're not losing or gaining a congressman, so it really doesn't have anything to do with us. That's something that's off someplace else. But it does have something to do with you. And tonight you're going to hear more about that. The program tonight, I want to be sure you understand, is co-sponsored by UW-Rock County, the Beloit League of Women Voters, and the Janesville League of Women Voters. And I've been working with a committee of Carolyn Brandine, Amy Goloxon, Jan Kinnaman, Lori Stottler, Betty Carr, and Kay Dupree. So lots of us doing things kind of in pulling it all together. Our panel tonight is going to be Pete Cannon, who has worked with on several of the earlier Wisconsin redistricting projects as a senior research analyst with the Wisconsin Legislative Reference Bureau. So Pete's going to give us kind of the big picture, but he's been in the trenches with the work at the state level for many years. Lori Stottler, the Rock County Clerk, everyone knows Lori, who has responsibility for overseeing the election voting process itself within Rock County, and consequently cares a lot about how changes in district lines impact both clerks and voters. And finally, Randy Terronez, who's the assistant to the Rock County Administrator, who will be given the day-to-day task of coordinating the work of an ad hoc committee that will be appointed by the county board to recommend district lines to the County Board of Supervisors for their approval. Unless it's a point of clarification, you really didn't quite get a point or something like that, unless it's a point of clarification, why don't we hold our questions until all three of the panelists have had a chance to talk? Because the second or third speaker may very well answer the question you had to begin with. But then we'll open it up for a discussion and comments and questions that you might have. So, Pete, why don't we start with you?
I think we're going to start with Laura.
We're going to start with me.
Backwards.
Yeah, yep.
Do it.
Surprise.
Do it.
Surprise.
We've been talking behind your back.
We're going to start with me because I'm going to just keep it real elementary. I brought a series of pictures with in hopes that I could illustrate my point. Again, I'm Lori Stottler. I'm the Rock County Clerk. I am a whole lot better at taking notes for the chair who's with us tonight and making ballots and making sure that the polling places are ready to go on election day. So go like this and I'll know that you're with me. If you're not, we'll try to slow down. But this is a series of maps from our GIS system at the county. And as you can see, every little block here, there's 28 municipalities in Rock County. Every little block here you can see is a township. You've got your cities that have some pretty strange, they have some pretty strange works because of annexations and things like that. But, you know, we look at it, this is our boundaries. This is the way that we live. Now, what happens is we go out and Pete's going to explain how this is done, but this is the 2000 Supervisory District boundary lines. And it's done by equal proportion, and I'm gonna save it all for you, Pete. So, but I want you to look at the red lines here and see that, you know, down in here you've got supervisors that, you know, have little small territories, really because they're largely populated. If you go up and look at Al Sweeney's territory up there in the upper left-hand corner, he's got almost 2 full townships, and you've got Mary Mawiney up here in the corner, who's got, you know, a lot of Johnstown and Lima. And so, you know, all the supervisors in the crowd are going, where am I, where am I? And a lot of them are with the bigger blocks. And then, of course, you've got, you know, 8 or 9 in here, and I think there's 12 in Janesville. So that would be nice if that was it for the county, for setting up ballots for there. But we're going to go ahead and break this down into voting wards. A site that I hope everybody knows about by now is called Voter Public Access Wisconsin, vpa.wi.gov. Awesome website to send new people to, awesome website to send people who want to write their legislators or their school board. And basically, it tells you where you're going to vote on election day. We have 50 polling places in Rock County, and they're all spread out to meet the equal access boundaries. We talked about this in February with just one thing on the ballot. Do we consolidate polling places or don't we? The city of Beloit decided we're going to do that. We're going to take it to 2 places. We didn't get a lot of backlash from that. It wasn't something that people were too upset about, but we're a little nervous with April now if they'll go back to their regular polling place. Janesville didn't really want to take that risk, so they ran what we call a skeleton crew. But you can kind of see now with the supervisory districts and the boundaries that some of these lines actually cross over each other here. You've got a supervisory in 2 different voting wards, so that means in this little block right here, I've got 2 different ballot styles. So that would be nice, but then the school districts draw their own boundaries, and that's this green You're following me on where I'm going with this, right? There's 13 school districts that border Rock County. There's 8 major, but there's 13 total. And a lot of it is when you get into the, oh, I think this is Whitewater. Way up in the corner, you've got Albany. Broadhead is over here somewhere. So we've got little tiny slivers in Rock County that we have to take care of. In Broadhead, we only have wards 7 and 8. And I think there's only 22 voters there. So what's likely going to happen during the census is those 22 voters are going to go back in their county and until the next annexation. So you've got your school districts that overlap. And the one thing that I'm realizing, and I hope Pete will speak to this, is the school district, even though I'm a 5-year school board member, we don't sit around a lot with the boundary lines committee at the county level to see if we can get those boundaries a little bit more similar. So there's some real messes up here in Janesville. I don't use the pointer here. This is the Milton area, and it's if you've got to circulate nomination papers out there, it's a mess. You can cross the street and be in the wrong district, and so my hope would be that in this census we're gonna work at that a little bit. But moving kids from school to school is not a popular public favorite. So we've added all this, and we're going to add on our Senate and Assembly districts now. And you can't even see the colors anymore because and that's just kind of to illustrate the point that, we have the 2 Senate districts. I'm not going to talk about where they are. You can see them on the map. The 4 Assembly districts, which is the yellow, and you can, it's all by population, but they don't get together and say we're all going to stay in the same group. So it's overlapping supervisory districts, it's overlapping school districts. I think I've got just one more. Add the congressional districts 1 and 2 in there, and I think that adds me 6 extra ballots. So last spring, when all 29 of the supervisors, counties can do that differently. You can either all go on at once, or you can rotate. In Rock County, they all go on at once. So when you're putting the 29 on, I think I had 172 ballot styles last April. I have to go to the printer tomorrow, and so when I'm done here, I'm going to go home and proof one more time. This is the Rock County ballot file. This is just for, and it's an easy one this year, there's only 72 ballot styles. But making sure that everybody gets in the right place and has the right names, they're spelled right, the number that you vote for is right, that they're in the spring election for nonpartisan, the fall election for partisan. When you get these overlapping like this, it gets a little bit overwhelming. And I think that's my last picture. Kind of talking about the multiple ballot styles, I'm required by law to publish in one newspaper ballot samples and the polling places for the whole county. Now, some people would say my ballot style wasn't in the paper, and I'm really upset about that. And I've been taken to task in my 3 years as clerk that I have not published some ballot styles, but you can imagine the expense. Even though it's a legal notice, it's still very, very expensive. And if I shorten it or make it smaller and you can't read it, it really doesn't do you a lot of good. Good news is voter public access, in about 3 days, you'll be able to go out there and see your ballot. And you'll also be able to go onto the website for the county, under county clerk, and see your ballot. But I only publish a handful of ballot styles. So census counts and redistricting, it really does affect my job, but it's more of in the details of how it gets done. So my vested interest is in trying to make the boxes as neat and tidy and not overlapping as possible. So before I hand it over to Pete, I just want to talk about the timeline. Starting April 1st, you really just have to remember 60, 60, 60. And it's going to get us there. We've already had the census, and the congressional seats were apportioned in January, and that was when we were wondering if we were going to get one more or not, and we wound up with the same 8. April 1st, we're going to get our census data at the county. And Chair Podzilny, I think, is at is it the first meeting in March or the second meeting in March that you'll be appointing your committees?
Hopefully the first meeting.
Okay, so March 10th, we'll appoint committees. There'll be a technical committee that'll have, we have to make sure that everybody stays on task and gets things in on time, so I'll be on that committee. And then there'll be a whole bunch of people that understand boundaries and the rules that Peter's gonna explain to us in a minute. We'll have 60 days once we get that data to put together the county's preliminary plan. Then they have about 60 days for the municipalities to create their wards. So we'll have April, May, June, July is when the municipalities will have to create theirs. And so about August, they'll come back with their created wards. And then we get another kick at the can to go back and make sure that our supervisory districts are the way we want them. And then in the winter, we send it up to Madison and they put their legislative, congressional, and plans on it. April 2012. So next April is when you'll have your first election. Now, things that could happen is you could be assigned to another polling place because of where your lines may shift. You could have a new county supervisor. I'm going to get a lot of calls next April saying, I got the wrong ballot. I've always voted for Bob Fazell, but now I have to vote for Anna Marie. That's going to be part of what's going to happen because it's going to shift a little bit, and I'm going to have to make sure that I pretty much am going to have to reinstall my entire database so that I've got it exactly as the files go. November 2012 is going to be a big election all around. I was up in Madison this week for our clerks conference, and the Government Accountability Board is making some suggested changing to, and I don't know how many of you are following the Janesville City Council, but they also signed a resolution as well to try to knock out some elections. People are election tired, and I would not be upset if they took one of them out of this, but it's got to make sure that the timelines follow the MOVE Act, which is the Military Overseas Voters Act, and it's a 45-day spiel. Long story short, what could happen is our spring primary, our nonpartisan spring primary for 2013 is very likely going to happen on our November 12 ballot. So if I were to be running for school board in that year, which I won't be, but if I were, I would have to take my nomination papers out long before, like in October. I would have to be competing with, and I'm just looking at this from a local person, but I'd have to be competing with all the big partisan people that are on the partisan ballot in November to get my point across. And this is where the league is really going to be important if this happens, because we've not seen partisan, nonpartisan ballots for a couple of decades now in Wisconsin. So those are some things that are out there that will also be impacted, but I think, well, this is the closer to home timetable, but we brought the resource guide, which has this timetable on it, so if you actually want that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Pete, and you're going to actually be able to tell them what this is about, and I'll just sit over here and proof my ballots.
I retired about 6 years ago now, and I'm now on the board of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, so I went from one kind of nonpartisan to a different kind of nonpartisan. But one of the things that's always struck me about redistricting is very amusing. I was part of the state legislature staff in 1990, 92, and in 2000, 2002. And redistricting is the only thing I've ever discovered in my life where if you've done it once, you're an expert. Because it only happens every 10 years. And so, most people have never done it once. A lot of what I did at the Legislative Reference Bureau was talk to Lori and her equivalents in 71 other counties and municipal clerks in 400 or 500 municipalities, because I was responsible for working with them partly to explain the rules, but partially to get that legislative database created. So I was getting the data on the municipal wards from the counties, from the municipalities, so the legislature could use wards to build legislative districts. So anyway, Laurie's shown you why nobody in their right mind would want to do this. The question is, why do we do it? And the answer is there's this little thing called the Constitution, and the Wisconsin Constitution said at its first session, after each enumeration made by the authority of the United States, the legislature shall apportion and district anew the members of the Senate and Assembly according to the number of inhabitants. And that's where the rubber hits the road. Just in passing, remember it says inhabitants. It doesn't say adults, it doesn't say voters, it doesn't say U.S. citizens, it says inhabitants. And so if there is a prison in Rock County, they get counted in Rock County. If there are illegal immigrants in Rock County and they got counted somehow, they get counted. It's inhabitants. Even then, if every part of the state grew at exactly the same rate, we wouldn't have to do it because the number of inhabitants in each district would be the same. But of course, that's ridiculous. It's never going to happen. I mean, there are annexations all over the county. I'm sure Janesville has had some dozens of annexations. Beloit's probably had a few, some of the smaller cities. And the population has changed in various ways. We already know that in April 1st, 2010, there were 5,688,230 people in the state that got counted. That's tad over 6%. The U.S. was up almost 10%, so we were behind the U.S. average. Congressional districts, we're going to add 41,820 people to each congressional district. So Paul Ryan will have 41,000 some odd new constituents. State Senate districts are up almost 10,000. State Assembly districts are up 3,379. Again, the population growth is very uneven. Milwaukee County was, I'm using Department of Administration's January 2010 numbers because we don't have the Census Bureau numbers except for that number for the whole state. So this was an estimate as of January 1st of last year. DOA had Dane County up 11%. That's almost twice the statewide average. Milwaukee was down 1% and change. Rock County's up about 8,000 people, which is pretty much dead on the state average. But even within Rock County, Janesville was up, again, pretty much dead on the state average. Beloit was up about half that. Evansville's up 23%. It's only 943 people, but that's a huge growth. I mean, that's Rock, La Prairie, and Footville. I think there maybe have been one more I didn't put in here that actually, according to the estimates, lost a couple of people. Very, very small. So 29 supervisory districts, which the county can change if they choose to do so. Do you remember the limits for the max for?
For the previous census?
No, for how many, the absolute maximum number of?
41, I think, is what our top was.
31?
41.
41, yeah. So, the number of could change, but assuming it stays at 29, every supervisory district gets about 300 more people. Again, these are estimates. The light gray is the least growth, the brown is the next least, the yellows are the most growth. And so if you think about it, well, here, let's go to the next slide. This district here had less population growth than other parts of the county. This district here had less growth. The area northwest Janesville and the area north and west outside Janesville had a lot heavier growth. That bright yellow is over 12%, so that's like twice the county average. Now, I'm an historian by training, and so these kind of things occasionally give me a little trouble. You have to kind of think about it. The smaller the growth, the larger the district's going to have to get. Even if we don't do anything else to it, this district is going to have a larger geographic extent, because you got to pick up some acres to get some more bodies. This area where there's been lots of growth, the districts would get smaller because it takes fewer acres to get 6,000 people. And so that, that's a little hard to wrap yourself around, because it's less growth, more area, more growth, less area. Things have to change. And of course, that's what makes it fun. The reason that it has to change is because if you don't change it, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so basically, nobody had tried very hard to redistrict the state for, I think, something like 40 years in 1963. The legislature, it's hard to do, so the legislature solved the problem by not doing it. In 1963, the Senate district up in Bayfield, Ashland, Douglas counties had just under 75,000 people. Senate district in Waukesha, Jefferson had 208,000 people. So in the one area, 74,000 people had a vote in the Senate. In another area, 208,000 people had one vote in the Senate. The poster child for this was Florida. The northern rural part of Florida, 40% of the population controls 60% of the state legislature. You run into another reason for not changing. Those 40% of the people that control 60% of the legislature were not about to give up control to those horrible people who lived in Miami and Tampa. The courts finally stepped in and said, this is absurd. It isn't going to happen anymore. And typically what happens when you violate the rules, and when the courts finally step in, the courts start making it really, really tight. And so Reynolds-Sims, which is the U.S. Supreme Court case that started modern reapportionment, the overriding objective must be substantial equality of population among the various districts, so that the vote of any citizen is approximately equal in weight to that of any other citizen in the state. One person, one vote. Piece of cake. I mean, why is this so difficult? Well, I already talked about one thing, and that's, various changes in power between regions. I mean, in this county, we've got urban, we've got suburban, we've got rural. Any time you move those boundaries, you're going to increase or decrease at least the perceived power of some part of the county. Will there be a second African-American district in Beloit? I haven't looked at the numbers, but it's quite possible that there's enough black population to where you need to think very, very hard about creating a second black district. Is there enough of a concentration of Latino population to where you need to think about a district that has most of the Latinos in it? Changing balance of power. And of course, the individual supervisors don't care about their district, right? It doesn't make any difference how you change my district. I'm okay with that, if you believe that. And for you and for me, I've invested a certain amount of energy, probably less than I ought to, into knowing how my alderman, how my city council member, how my supervisor, how my state representative vote. And if I move to a new district, all of a sudden I got to relearn that. And I'd really rather not. I've got a couple other things I'd rather do. I had a woman call the Legislative Reference Bureau. She had voted in the same polling place for 50 years and suddenly arrived at the polling place and discovered she had a new polling place. Competition. The way the districts are drawn increases, decreases the amount of competition, decreases, increases the amount of choice you have. Okay, so what are the rules? Equal population. That's the first rule. Compliance with the Voting Rights Act. That's the second rule. These are the only rules that are easy to deal with, relatively, and that override everything else. You have got to have districts that are equal in population. You have got to, and I'll talk a little more about the exceptions, but in general, you've got to pay attention to minority voting. We'd like them to be really neat. Look at that map. You know, wouldn't neat be nice? We are supposed to think about community of interest. I'm going to talk more about all of these in a minute. Preservation of political subdivisions. You know, we really would prefer that the town of Turtle not be divided into more than 50 or 60 parts. Again, in terms of voters, it's nice to keep the districts as close to the way they used to be as you can. And it's okay to protect incumbents. A lot of people think it's not. I think of it as a subset of preserving the core of prior districts. You can't preserve the core of a prior district without protecting incumbents to some extent. Equal population. Rock County in 2002 was in great shape. I would be mildly surprised if I could find a county in the state that was better than this. Let me rephrase that. I would be stunned if I could find a county in the state that's better than this. 35 people between the largest and smaller districts, practically speaking, you're not going to do any better than that. And frankly, I would argue that if you were within 100 people, it would still be really, really nice. City of Madison is not that good, and Madison's not bad at all. So, compactness. This is horribly uncompact. My God, look at that jagged line. I mean, couldn't they draw a better line than that? Well, the problem is that's the western boundary of the city of Janesville. Now, we could, have the city only annex in straight lines. You think that's likely? The problem with compactness is there are dozens of ways to measure compactness. I saw an article by a geographer, and he laid out at great length, I think, 12 different formulas for figuring compactness, and finished by saying none of them were worth a damn. I mean, circles would be perfect. The problem is they don't, what do you do with the space between the circles when you put them together? You don't get to vote. Squares are great. I mean, if we did everything on town lines, we could have really nice districts. Look at the western edge of the city of Janesville. And, think about how amazing it would be if you could actually put together towns and have the population come out anything close to equal. Preservation of political subdivisions. I mean, that's why that's in the state assembly district boundary, is because we tried to keep Janesville in two pieces, because the northeastern edge of Janesville is in a different district, if I recall correctly. Do you favor municipalities or do you favor towns? Okay, so we've got to make a split. Do we break the town of Harmony? I've always loved that. Harmony is split. It's sort of, to me, a perfect metaphor for redistricting. We just divided Harmony. Is it more important to keep Harmony in one chunk, or is it more important to keep Janesville in one chunk? If I live in Harmony, I'll tell you the answer to that question. It'll be a different answer than if I live in Janesville. Yeah, there's really no way to measure these. And the other problem is that after you get past equal population and after you get past minority voting, there's no priority. The courts have never said that you do this and then you do this and then you do this. If they did that, if they said the first thing you do is preserve political boundaries and then you worry about compactness or reverse them, it would be a lot easier, but there's no hierarchy to those choices. Community of interest, here's a nice long definition. I've always thought, we need to do the district so the Bears fans are all in one district. And the Shorewood in Madison and the Shorewood in Milwaukee should be in the same district. What is community of interest? The problem is we all belong to 5, 6, 10 communities of interest. Neil and I are both active in Audubon, so that's a community of interest. We're bird brains. We all belong to different churches. Some of us are active in one organization, some of us are active in another. It's an important thing. It's just how do you do it in practice? The courts have avoided competition. The Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, I think the league also would like to see more competitive districts. The courts have never ventured there. And so we will have a blatantly partisan gerrymander of the state assembly districts and state senate districts this fall. Oh yeah, guaranteed. The only difference in the gerrymander is going to be that the Republicans are going to be doing it, not the Democrats. If the Democrats controlled all 3 houses, I would say exactly the same thing. It's just who gets what done to them changes. Unless the Republicans are absolute and complete idiots, it will be a totally constitutional gerrymander. I can draw any number of terribly mischievous districts that are constitutional because the court has never said that you have to ensure competitive districts. These are things that you need to know. They are always the other person's plan. Your plan never, ever does either of these things. Packing or stacking means that you put everybody into one district so that they have as few votes as possible. So in other words, you create a whole bunch of 100% Democratic districts so you can create more 52% Republican districts. Fracturing means that you break a group apart. My graduate school roommate's first teaching job was in Blacksburg, Virginia. And coming from Madison, he was absolutely stunned to discover that Blacksburg, Virginia was a hotbed of leftist radicalism. At least that's what the people in Christiana County, Virginia thought. So the county board took Blacksburg and divided it into 5 pieces of pie. And Blacksburg did not have a supervisor on the county board. That's a really good job of fracturing. Gerrymandering. People think gerrymandering is new. The first gerrymander, probably not the first, but the first one that we talk about was in Massachusetts in 1812. Not 1912, 1812. And the Federalists decided that with a little creative map making, they could keep a majority in the state legislature. And the result looks sort of like this, according to an editorial cartoonist. And somebody said, it looks sort of like a salamander. Well, the governor's name was Elbridge Gerry. And so, of course, 5 seconds later, somebody said, no, it was a gerrymander. This is the 12th U.S. congressional seat in central North Carolina. There's one place I think about here, somebody said that if you opened both doors on your car when you were going through that part of the district, you'd kill everyone in that part of the district. The Supreme Court finally decided that this was not acceptable. They were trying, They were trying to create a black majority district. Mecklenburg is Charlotte, if I recall correctly. That's a gerrymander. The problem with gerrymanders is one of the Supreme Court justices said that it's sort of like pornography. You know it when you see it. There's one that's like a reverse C in Chicago, and it's almost as blatant as this one. But the problem is it creates a Latino district. The problem is that any other way you do it breaks up a black neighborhood. And so, it's kind of, it serves a couple of purposes at once, and the court said, okay, we'll let it stand. This is what you have to consider with minority groups. The minority has to be large enough and compact enough to constitute a majority in a single member district. I would have knocked this thing down. The court spent 50 pages saying that this was bad. I would have simply said, you've already set out in Thornburg versus Jingles that a minority has to be so geographically compact, and that doesn't make it. The group has to be politically cohesive. If Asians in Rock County seem to vote no differently from anybody else, then you don't need to particularly pay any attention to them. They have to be politically cohesive, and the majority also has to be politically cohesive in a different direction. In the absence of special circumstances, voting by the white majority usually defeats them. Okay, leaving aside all of the sort of kind of technical stuff, and I'm going to go through this really, really quick. These are some of the things that the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, the good government people, think you should think about in terms of doing redistricting. The people doing the redistricting need to be independent. They need to be relatively diverse. You need to give them some guidance, and we want everybody to play. Independence. The players shouldn't be the referees. The trouble with state legislature is that they're the people who do the redistricting and they're the people who pass the bill. We need the groups that are being set up to reflect the community. And we need to give those people some guidelines. We can't let them make up. It is perfectly okay for Rock County to say, consider compactness over keeping municipalities whole, or vice versa. But if everybody agrees on some order after those first two, and you tell that committee what the order is, everybody, I think, probably will be happier with the results because everybody's on the same page to start with. Input. Most of the counties in Wisconsin do a good job of this. But we need to remember, and we need to call people on it if they start getting off into a tangent. There is a handout that has a whole bunch of other resources, more than probably you will ever have time to work through. I'm rapidly getting out of date with all the changes and ideas that are floating around. So use that list of other sources. As long as it doesn't require me to spend days answering the question, I am perfectly happy to try and answer questions. I even have answers every once in a while. So I hope this gives you a little bit better feel, and yeah, and we'll get back to the school district thing for first question. How's that?
Good evening. My name is Randy Terronez. I'm the assistant to the county administrator for Rock County. I've only been here a few months, basically since summer. But one of my responsibilities is being staff to a variety of committees and ad hoc groups that the county board establishes. In February of this past year, the county board established an ad hoc committee for redistricting of supervisory districts, and it's patterned after what the county has done over the last, in the 2000 census and I believe in the 1990 census. The county has established a redistricting committee that consists of county board members as well as citizens at large. And so this round we have a 9-member ad hoc committee that's going to be identifying and submitting a plan to the county board on redistricting, of which 4 of those board members will be county board supervisors and 5 will be members at large. As mentioned earlier, we have our board chair, Russ Paulzilny, here in the last row with the other board members, Kurt Yankee, and we also have board member Bob Frizzell here. Basically, we're encouraging public participation. We'll have public hearings throughout the process. These committee meetings, these ad hoc group meetings will be open to the public and will be noticed. When we established the committee, they were advertised in the local paper. We had limited response, so we're asking, and we have a short application form over at the table there for people who are interested in serving on the committee to fill out this brief form, and any of the county board members and myself would be more than happy to receive the form completed, because we would like to move as quickly as possible. As mentioned, the ad hoc committee would hopefully be appointed at the March 10th county board meeting, which is coming up next week. Actually the original application deadline was Monday, but it's being extended so we can try to get some more interest. The county board, in addition to establishing the ad hoc group of 9, also established a technical committee consisting of 5 members. And Lori Stottler, the county clerk, will be on that committee as well as other municipal clerks from the county. And their role is to provide the technical assistance and come up with some tentative draft plans that would be submitted to the 9-member ad hoc group. The technical committee will be taking the census data, which will be released on or about April 1st, and preparing the draft plans. And then the ad hoc committee will be reviewing those draft plans and hopefully coming up with a consensus plan. And as Lori mentioned, we're on a 60-day time cycle. First 60 days, April through May, the county's involved in it. The next 60 cycle, the municipalities are involved in it. And the last 60-day cycle, the county is back in charge. So in May, the ad hoc committee will be having a redistricting plan proposed to the county board staff committee. Various policies, procedures, recommendations go through various committees. In this case, redistricting plans go through the county board staff committee tentatively for May 23rd. The county board at their May 25th meeting would be tentatively holding a public hearing on the draft plan and then adopting a tentative plan. The tentative plan then will be forwarded to the local municipalities, and then the second 60-day period starts with June and July, the local municipalities taking the county's draft plan of what the supervisory districts are, then developing ward plans, and with the cities, the aldermanic districts. The municipalities will be then adopting a tentative plan and forwarding it back to the county. In August starts then the last 60-day period. The redistricting committee will be reviewing the material fed back from the municipal ward plans and would be recommending a final plan to the county board. Tentatively, that final plan would be submitted to the August 25th meeting. These dates are very tentative, and it's all subject to the county board's schedule. In addition, during August, the county staff then drafts an ordinance that would be developed that incorporates the final plan. And for an ordinance process, it has to go through 2 readings, and so tentatively the end of August meeting would be the first of 2 readings. In September, the second reading of the final plan would be held, and the plan would be adopted either at the September 8th or the September 22nd county board meeting, and then forwarded on to the Secretary of State to be effective as of November 15th. Just briefly, that's kind of the highlights of what we're going through here at the local level. There's obviously an opportunity for you to be involved in this process. It only happens once every 10 years, and as we're pulling out, what we did 10 years ago, sometimes we get our files mixed up. And I was going through the 2000 census, and I found the Y2K file, but that wasn't it. So, as we here again, as we do this every 10 years, and obviously with technology, it gets easier and easier. 20 or 30 years ago, it took a lot of staff time to come up with the issue of how to provide as much one person, one vote representation versus now from a technological standpoint with GIS systems and so forth. It's a lot more easier to do. On the other hand, it still needs human involvement to get the final product right. So that's kind of the highlights of what we're doing here. And as a reminder, we do have a sign-up sheet of anybody who's interested in serving on the committee to do so.
Thank you. Questions? Yes.
I don't know if it's for this committee or the county board members, but how likely is it that the county board will decide to change the number of supervisors?
The question, and I've been asked to, I have a microphone. I've been asked to repeat the question. So how likely is it that the county board will change the number of supervisory districts? Things.
Perhaps I can address that. I'm Russ Podzilli, the county board chair. We have asked several groups, including the League of Women Voters, if there has been any interest in changing the size of the board, and our response has been overwhelming. Not a single person has asked to change the size of the board. So at this time, I have no intention of requesting that the size of the board be changed. There are two committees, and I heard the mention of the technical committee, which is already formed, and that will be the clerks from the city of Edgerton, Janesville, the city of Beloit, and our member at large, and by county board rule, we have to have a supervisor from a township, and that will be John Lauder. And the chairman of that committee I have appointed is Lori Stottler. She will be heading the technical committee to help the other committee. Several of the people on the ad hoc committee have already been selected. This is Supervisor Kurt Yankee from Beloit. He will be on the committee. Marilyn Jensen from Janesville, a supervisor, will be on the committee. Sandra Kraft from Evansville, who's the vice chair of the county board, will be on the committee. Ethel Himmel will also be on that committee. And let's see, is there anybody else that I know of? A fellow recently retired from the county by the name of John Nails will be on that committee. And we will be meeting, and there will be several occasions for the public to give us their input as we do this. As has been suggested, it looks easy, but it's not always that easy. And if you have questions anytime, I'd be happy to answer them for you. There's a little publication that's put out by the Wisconsin Counties Association. It kind of mirrors Pete's discussion this evening. And if you want to get that, I can give you the Wisconsin Counties Association website. And that would be www.wicounties, all together, .org. And I've gotten a lot of my information because I do serve on the board of directors of the Wisconsin Counties Association. So it's going to be a real interesting experience. And as Pete said, if there aren't a lot of people with experience, it's understandable. You can only do it once in a lifetime. I know that's more than answering the question of how many supervisors, but.
Thank you. Other questions for panelists? Yes.
The emphasis that we have is on county supervisory districts and then the wards or whatever subdivisions of those districts happen. The thing that seems like it would be nice to have some input in, but hasn't been discussed, are the state level, the assembly districts and the Senate district or the congressional representative. Can you tell us more about how that's gonna really happen this time? Wasn't there a big lawyer firm hired or something to do that? Is that
The question that Kay is asking, I think probably of Pete, is, so tell us more about redistricting at the state level and the congressional level. And there was something in the media about the Wisconsin legislature hiring a firm to do it somehow.
I'm not entirely sure how the state level process will work. Let me back up a little bit. The building block for everything except congressional districts has always been municipal wards. Now, the legislature is not required to use municipal wards. They have done it for at least 50 years now. And so the city of Janesville, the city of Beloit, the town of Harmony, when they create wards, is exercising a certain amount of control over everything else. And if the wards are done well, and for example, in Madison where I live, the wards and the neighborhood associations match about as close as you might hope, then you're kind of recognizing community of interest and you're making it a little more difficult for the people up the line to screw it up. So, involvement in deciding where logical ward boundaries is really pretty important. In the past, the Republicans have drawn maps, the Democrats have drawn maps, and then they've gone to court and the courts have drawn the real map because there was split control. Congressional districts are done by the legislature. It is alleged that the congressmen sit down and decide what they want to do and the legislature rubber stamps it. I did not hear a single congressman who complained vocally about his district last time around, so I'll let that answer the allegation, if you will. And so, you can assume that the 8 congressmen are going to have a major impact on what the congressional districts look like. But congressional, state senate, and state assembly are all done by a bill which passes both houses of the legislature and is signed by the governor, just like any other bill. And the reason that I suggested that you can have a blatant partisan gerrymander and have it still be constitutional, what has happened in the past is we have not had an adopted bill that the court had to look at. And as soon as we get the new numbers sometime in the next couple of weeks, the existing districts are going to be unconstitutional, because they're going to have changed in population enough to not meet one vote, one person, one vote. So if the legislature doesn't pass a bill, it goes to the court. The court can do pretty much anything they want to. I mean, they have to answer to the higher courts, and so they follow the same general rules. They tend, it seems, to draw a map that sort of kind of looks as much like the old map as they can and still have the numbers come out. But if the legislature passes a bill, then the court is simply saying it's constitutional or it's not constitutional. And again, I guarantee you I can do great mischief and have it be constitutional. That means that the Democrats are going to do a lot of yelling, and the map's going to be drawn by the Republicans. There will be a committee of the legislature, almost undoubtedly. There will be public hearings. Possibly the place where you can have the most impact. A state map has to be a unit. Okay, I can't go to I'm going to say Senator Robeson because she's out of the picture and I'm not offending anybody, and say, we really need to do Janesville and Beloit this way. And she can't go to the legislature and say, do Janesville and Beloit this way, and, just sort of to heck with the rest of the state. Whatever changes you make in Rock County have to fit into 99 districts. Now, I think one of the things that maybe has changed is computers have a thing called basically auto draw. And you simply let the computer draw the map. I think that's very dangerous because there are all kinds of built-in things in that we don't know quite what they are. Again, for example, is the computer going to break Harmony rather than Janesville or the other way around? You could use it to draw a map for the rest of the state so that your state representative could come in with a plan to change Rock County that would fit into the matrix of the state much, much better than you've ever had the possibility to do before. Because the software will run on whatever computer is sitting on your desktop. In 1992, I was sitting at a $50,000 computer running $50,000 worth of software. Today, it'll run on, if your computer's less than 5 years old, maybe less than 10 years old, it'll run the software. And so the League of Women Voters or the Beloit Chamber of Commerce could buy the software and come up with an alternative map. And I think, there is some chance that if people come to the legislature and with a workable plan and say, hey, we would like the Rock River Valley to look more like this, that you maybe can have some impact. Does that?
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Neil.
I was just at another meeting today and mentioned that I was coming to this redistricting meeting, and the woman said, is there any chance of getting the 4th Ward in Janesville named the 4th Ward again? I don't think there's anybody at this table that's directly related to that, but you've said that the municipal wards have a huge effect. So the county chooses supervisors. How do does Janesville and Beloit have similar ad hoc committees?
The Janesville City Council will draw both the wards for Janesville and the aldermanic districts for Janesville. Same for Beloit. Town boards and village boards, I think, are almost always at large. Correct me if I'm wrong about that.
We have some that are first and second. We have one area that's a north side and south side supervisor. Actually, Janesville City Council and Beloit are at large elected. Our city of Evansville and city of Edgerton have aldermanic districts.
Okay.
So, no, in Janesville, our council members are not assigned to specific wards. So I'm not sure that that's even really taken into account when they're drawing them and numbering them, taking that history into account. But you may wish to drop Kathy Voskel a little note about that so that it's in the tickler.
And I'm just wondering, do you know if Janesville is going to have an ad hoc committee also, or is it just going to be the county clerk or the city clerk that does it?
Well, they're in the second
That's
60
what I mean.
days. So yes, I mean, we don't do their work for them.
Right.
So once we have our 60-day preliminary plan, they will, I'm sure that their planning department and they will have citizens, I would hope.
I think almost universally, the question's actually never come up before. So I don't know if it's required or not, but I don't recall ever seeing one that wasn't an ordinance, which means that the city council does it. I don't know if it would be illegal to do it by a proclamation by the mayor. I've just never seen one. I think it probably has to be an ordinance. And so it's really the city council that does it. Madison is using a procedure not terribly dissimilar from what you're using. I was the only citizen who showed up at the first meeting of that council a couple of weeks ago. Their naming conventions are naming conventions. I mean, there's no legal reason why you have to call one ward Ward 1 and another ward. I think actually in a town, the town hall has to be in Ward 1. And there's some talk about changing that because it's like, so what? But in cities,
Sometimes, I've heard you talk about the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign and the need felt by some people to change the old way of doing the whole process to, I know Iowa uses a different form than Wisconsin does in terms of the elected officials in the legislature choosing.
you have to understand that the organization in Iowa which does redistricting for the legislature is the organization that I worked for in Wisconsin. And so I have absolutely no reason to think that that's the best system. It is, of course.
And why is that?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, the corundum, it seems to me, of redistricting is that the people who are most qualified to do it are the people that most frequently do it for bad reasons. I am always absolutely awed by how well supervisors know their districts. You guys walk the streets. And so, my former boss felt that the only people to do it were the legislature. And it was because it's their assigned task, and it was because they know their districts. The problem is that in practice, sometimes that knowledge turns out to be used for, shall we say, less than angelic purposes. This just broke me up. I just discovered the second piece of this yesterday. There's a guy named Obama that ran for House of Representatives in Illinois in 2000. And they redistricted Illinois in 2002, and he discovered that he now lived a block outside the congressional district that he had run for. Just by chance, of course. He went to the Illinois Senate and got his state Senate district drawn, instead of east-west, drawn north-south, which just happened to put the Gold Coast in downtown Chicago into his district, which gave him a lot of money that he could tap when he ran for U.S. Senate. Also, obviously just by accident. The temptation for the people whose careers are at stake to play games with the boundaries are extreme. And it only takes a couple of people to do things. So what the Democracy Campaign would advocate is some kind of a nonpartisan system. Arizona has a commission which is appointed by various factions and tries to be nonpartisan. California, if we had another 45 minutes, I would attempt to run through how California is going to do it this time around. All of us who are redistricting junkies are going to be sort of sitting glued to the screen because it's just the most amazing system. If it works, it may actually work really well, but there are so many moving parts. I mean, they start out as basically every citizen of California can apply to be on the commission. And then I think it's the California Elections Commission that has to somehow come up with about 30 people, and then they come up with 15. And it's just the most amazing jury rig of a system. But the trick is how do we get people who are knowledgeable but who do not have a stake in the game? And it is a very, very difficult thing to do. What Iowa decided to do is they simply made it a staff function. And so my equivalent in Iowa draws a map. The legislature can turn down 2 maps and then it goes back to the old system. They have consistently turned down 1. They have never gone to the old system. And in the Iowa staff, they take basically the rules that I looked at earlier. Unlike everybody else in the known universe, They do not even put the addresses of the legislators on the map. I will guarantee you everybody in Wisconsin, as long as I've been associated with it, knew where the other legislators lived. The Republican plan in 1992, just by accident, had 2 Republicans running against each other and 12 Democrats. Just you know, one of those things that happens by accident sometimes. You know, having some group that has relatively little stake in it is what we would like to see, and I will admit that it is extremely difficult to do.
Other questions?
Can I go back and do the school district? The problem with school districts is that school districts don't really like having 2 school buses from 2 different districts going down Oak Street. And so school district boundaries sort of kind of have a tendency to run through backyards, which means they divide census blocks. And the bottom rule of redistricting is you can't divide census blocks. And so getting a 1-to-1 match between legislative, aldermanic, supervisory, geography, and school districts is almost impossible because the school district boundaries do not match the census boundaries, census geography. If there is one thing that I could change about the U.S. Census, I would persuade them to map school districts. They map municipal boundaries, which have nothing to do. Census blocks are usually something that you can see. The census block I live in is bounded by Sidney Street, Sherman Avenue, Few Street, and Elizabeth Street. It's a block. You get out in the countryside, it may be a railroad track, it might be a river, might be county, whatever. But it's almost always something you can see. They do map municipal boundaries, which you can't see. So if they can map municipal boundaries, which you can't see, why the heck can't they map school district boundaries? And the only thing I can suggest is that everybody, sometime after the dust settles in 2013, write your congressman, write your senator, and say, tell the Census Bureau to map school district boundaries. It would make her life much easier, would make everyone's life
Well,
much
in this
easier.
job, anyway.
Oh, question over here. Yes.
Illinois, there are 846 schools.
That's all?
It wasn't a question, it was a comment. He said, in Illinois, there are 804 school districts?
846, I understand.
846 school districts.
Double.
And that's considering that Chicago's 1, right? So that's 845 for all the rest of the state.
Other questions? You've got a question mark on your face, Carolyn. Any other questions? Did you want to give our speakers little gifts? Thank you. Okay. Well, we would, yes, we would very, very much thank you for clearing up all sorts of things for us, complicating matters more, but it is an interesting and challenging task, and we appreciate your coming to talk with us. Thank you.
Thanks.